Ava Watson used to be the pride of her family. At 29, the eldest of two daughters, she had graduated with honors in architecture from UC Berkeley. To extended family and neighbors in the quiet suburb of Beaverton, Oregon, she was the gold standard, bright, hardworking, full of promise. Then the recession hit. The construction industry collapsed. Leading architecture firms froze hiring. Despite her stellar academic record and polished portfolio, Ava became one of thousands left without a foothold. After months of fruitless job searching, Ava moved back into her childhood home, a modest two-story house, where her parents Gary and Linda Watson still lived with her teenage sister Riley. At first, it felt like a temporary detour. Linda packed lunches for interviews. Gary read over her cover letters. They said, "Just stay here a few months, save some money, and get back on your feet." Her old bedroom remained untouched. Awards still hung on the walls. Architecture models lined the shelves. It was a small sanctuary, a space that reminded her she still had worth. Riley, 8 years younger and still in high school, would often barge in with college worries or school drama. Ava welcomed those moments, feeling the bond of sisterhood again after years away. To ease the burden, Ava chipped in wherever she could. She contributed $300 monthly from her dwindling savings, cooked dinner 3 nights a week, deep cleaned the bathrooms, and helped repair the backyard deck. She asked for nothing, only space to rebuild herself. But over time, the dynamic shifted. She was no longer the golden girl. She became the unemployed adult sleeping in her childhood room. One evening at dinner, Linda beamed as she shared that Riley had been selected for her school's honors program. Ava was in honors too, Gary added almost as an afterthought. Linda nodded, barely pausing. Yes, but things were easier back then. Riley faces so much more competition now. It wasn't a direct insult, but it wasn't acknowledgement either. Ava smiled and changed the subject. She wanted to believe this was temporary. The next day, she got a call. Cascade Design Group wanted to schedule an interview. A mid-sized firm with a reputation for sustainable projects, it was a perfect fit. She pressed her old blazer, polished her resume, and walked into that meeting with cautious optimism. The interview went even better than expected. The design director praised her portfolio's blend of aesthetics and practicality. For the first time in months, Ava allowed herself to feel genuine hope on the drive home. That night, she made homemade 3-layer lasagna, her mother's favorite. She didn't announce her news loudly, just shared it through dinner. Riley asked about the company. Gary raised his wine glass and said, "From Berkeley to Cascade, Ava's on her way." Linda smiled, but her eyes wandered toward Riley. In that moment, Ava didn't dwell on it. She believed the worst was behind her. She had no idea that just 2 days later, the very home where she sought refuge would turn into the place that made her sleep on a cold hardwood floor, not as a daughter, but as an inconvenience. 2 days after her interview with Cascade Design Group, Ava still carried a quiet sense of optimism. The meeting with the design director had not only gone smoothly, it had reminded her that her skills still mattered. For the first time in months, she had felt truly seen, not as a burden or a disappointment, but as a professional with potential. That evening, she decided to cook a special family dinner. Not to celebrate prematurely, but to mark what could be a turning point. She went to the local market, picking out fresh ricotta, her mother's favorite high-quality ground beef, and hand-selected ingredients for a classic 3-layer lasagna. It was the kind of dish she used to help make as a child, the kind that meant warmth and home. She kneaded the dough from scratch, simmered the sauce until it thickened perfectly, and layered it with care. She even opened a bottle of red wine tucked away since last Christmas. As the oven timer chimed, the scent filled the house. Riley entered the kitchen with a delighted gasp at the beautifully set table. Gary raised an eyebrow at the wine. Something special tonight, he asked. Ava offered a soft smile. I just had a really promising interview today. Thought I'd mark the occasion. No one asked for details. No one encouraged her to share more. Linda nodded vaguely and turned to ask Riley about student council planning. Ava felt a familiar sting, but didn't let it darken the moment. She poured the wine and gently redirected the conversation to lighter topics, asking Riley about college plans, sharing funny stories from the architecture firm's website. For a few minutes, she didn't feel like the daughter sleeping in limbo. She felt like part of a family again. To Ava, "Hope we'll hear some good news soon," Gary said, raising his glass. Linda smiled politely. Riley added, "Can't wait to see you in your own design office someday." Ava nodded, her throat tightening with emotion. The encouragement was faint, but it was still more warmth than she'd had in months. After dinner, Ava washed dishes alone as she usually did. She didn't need praise. She only longed for a sense of belonging. She glanced around the kitchen, the same counters where she used to do homework, where her mother taught her how to season sauce, where her father once placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "You're going to do great things." She wanted to believe they still meant it. She didn't know that in less than 48 hours, the same people who toasted her future would quietly shove her belongings into the hallway and say, "The living room floor is open." That morning, Ava had left the house early to attend a networking event for young architects in downtown Portland. It was one of the few chances to connect with industry professionals, so she dressed neatly, brought copies of her portfolio, and walked out the door with cautious optimism. What she didn't know was that while she was shaking hands and discussing her future, her past was being boxed up and pushed aside literally. When she returned later that afternoon, something felt off. The house was unusually silent. She entered through the side door as usual and called out, "I'm home," but no one answered. Climbing the stairs, she stopped cold. Her belongings, boxes of books, clothes, architectural models, and personal keepsakes, were stacked haphazardly in the hallway. Everything that defined her space, her identity, had been moved. Her heart pounded. Her first thought was that they'd been robbed, but nothing was missing. Just relocated. She pushed open her bedroom door, her hand trembling. The transformation was gut-wrenching. Riley's queen-sized bed now stood where Ava's twin had been. The walls were plastered with pop star posters and string lights. Ava's drafting table, where countless hours of designs had come to life, was gone, replaced by a cluttered vanity. It was as if Ava had never existed. "Oh, you're back," her mother's voice came from behind her, casual, almost cheerful. Linda walked past with a laundry basket in hand. "We moved your things out. Riley needs her own space to prep for college." Ava turned slowly. "You moved me out. Without even asking." "Well, you were out all day," Linda replied, as though that made it reasonable. "And you're barely home anymore with all your meetings and job stuff. The living room floor's fine for now. We still have that old sleeping bag." Ava wasn't sure what stung more, the eviction itself or the indifferent tone that accompanied it. Gary emerged from the master bedroom, chiming in. "Maybe this'll motivate you to find your own place soon." Ava said nothing. She stood there, boxed out of her own life, staring at the physical manifestation of how little space she now occupied in their world. No argument, no outburst. Just a strange stillness, numb but wide awake. That night, Ava unrolled the sleeping bag on the living room floor, wedged between the coffee table and TV stand. The hardwood pressed painfully into her hip. Every creak of the house sounded sharper than usual, the hum of the fridge, the clunk of the heater. Upstairs, Riley's music played through the walls, bright and cheerful. It echoed in the room that used to be hers. Ava closed her eyes. She didn't cry. but something inside her cracked. Since the first night curled up on the living room floor, Ava had come to understand that what changed wasn't just her sleeping arrangement, it was her place in the family. In the house she grew up in, where she was once a source of pride, she now existed like an object out of place, not important enough to be protected, not insignificant enough to be removed. Every morning Ava woke before sunrise. Her back ached, her neck stiff from the hardwood floor and the worn-out sleeping bag. Quietly, she rolled up her bedding and tucked it away under the stairs, as if even the evidence of her presence needed to be hidden. No one mentioned her being displaced anymore. No one asked if she'd slept well. They passed her like she was part of the furniture, a scuffed-up ottoman no one used, but no one moved either. She still contributed cooking dinner 3 times a week, cleaning and paying for utilities from her dwindling savings. But ever since losing her room, her efforts seemed to fade into the background. One morning, while preparing for a virtual interview, her mother asked, "Could you clean the downstairs bathroom again? Riley's study group is coming over." Ava adjusted her blouse collar and replied, "I cleaned it yesterday." Linda shrugged. "We'll clean it again. You're not that busy." Ava missed the first 5 minutes of the interview, scrubbing a spotless bathroom, not because she lacked priorities, but because she knew that saying no would label her ungrateful. At dinner, the family chatted like everything was normal. The conversation revolved around Riley's new room, how lavender walls would help her concentrate, how her new bedding looked more mature. No one asked about Ava's job applications or whether she'd heard back from the company she interviewed with. She sat at the table but felt like she was behind glass, present audible but unseen. Riley, once apologetic, now barely acknowledged Ava's situation. She often brought friends over unannounced, claiming the living room Ava's makeshift bedroom for movie nights or gossip sessions. One afternoon, Ava returned from a job fair to find 4 teenage girls sprawled across the couch laughing loudly. Riley waved at her with a grin. "This is my sister. She's like between things right now." One of the girls giggled. "You really sleep here? That's so sad." Ava smiled faintly and said nothing, but something inside cracked just a little more. She was no longer a daughter. She was a nameless guest in the house she once called home. Some rebellions don't start with shouting. They begin with silence and grow in the quiet hours of sleepless nights. That's how Ava chose to respond to the humiliation she was enduring, not with confrontation, but with observation, planning, and precision. One Tuesday afternoon, while preparing dinner, Ava's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was an email from Cascade Design Group. "We are pleased to offer you the position of junior architect. Starting salary $62,000 per year. Benefits begin after 90 days. She read the lines again and again, barely believing it. After months of unanswered applications, someone finally saw her worth. There she stood stirring vegetables in the same kitchen where she was considered a burden, still sleeping on the floor, but inside something shifted. She had options now. "Everything all right?" Linda asked, noticing Ava had paused. "Just spam," Ava replied smoothly, slipping the phone into her pocket. It was the first time she deliberately hid her success. She didn't want to share her victory with people who had never celebrated her efforts. She didn't need congratulations from those who never cared to ask. Instead, Ava spent that night thinking this was her way out. But she wouldn't leave as someone pushed out. She would choose the timing, the manner, and leave behind a message they couldn't ignore. The next morning, as she brewed coffee, Ava looked out the kitchen window. From there, she had a clear view of house number 115, the property next door, that had been sitting vacant for months. The lawn was overgrown. The paint was peeling. But to Ava, it looked like a blank canvas, and she was ready to design something extraordinary. The idea stirred something deep in her. This wasn't just about moving out. It was about staying next door and letting them see exactly what they had dismissed, not through words, but through action. 3 days later, Ava quietly contacted a real estate agent. She scheduled a viewing during her lunch break, armed with her new job contract and a small inheritance from her grandmother, money her parents never knew she had. The agent, a middle-aged woman named Melanie, eyed her skeptically. "This house needs a lot of work," she said. "Kitchen's stuck in the 80s. Plumbing and electrical are outdated." "The bones are solid," Ava replied, eyes fixed on the backyard that directly bordered her parents' property. "I don't need it to be perfect. I need it to be in the right place." Melanie smiled. She understood. Ava wasn't just buying a house. She was redrawing the map of her life. No one in Ava's family knew that just days after accepting her job offer, she had quietly signed a contract to purchase the house next door. House number 115, with its overgrown lawn and dusty windows, had been sitting unsold for months. Most neighbors saw it as a forgotten property. Ava saw it as the perfect location, close enough for her family to witness her transformation, distant enough to claim her independence. With a freshly signed employment contract, a stellar credit score, and a modest inheritance from her grandmother, Ava was quickly approved for a mortgage. The entire process unfolded in silence. No announcements, no hints. By day, she still slept on the floor. By night, she was meeting with contractors and design teams, choosing materials, paint colors, and reimagining the space from the ground up. Raphael, the contractor recommended by her realtor Melanie, became a key ally. They met each evening to walk through the renovation plans. "We need 3 things finished first: kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom," Ava said with quiet authority. "The rest can wait," Raphael nodded. "What about the backyard?" Ava looked through the window toward the yard that bordered her parents' property. A small smile curved on her lips. "I have very specific plans." Meanwhile, she maintained the illusion of normalcy. Still cooked dinner, still cleaned, still handed over her utility contribution. No one in the Watson house seemed to notice she came home later than usual, or that her shirts had paint smudges, or that her hands were marked with tile grout. She was rebuilding her world silently, deliberately, with no need for recognition. Each morning she left before anyone woke up, heading to her new job at Cascade Design. As a junior architect assigned to a sustainable office complex, she was entrusted with major design elements. Her colleagues respected her insight. Her director valued her judgment. In that space, Ava wasn't an afterthought. She was Ava Watson, a name spoken with respect, a voice heard and sought after. And most importantly, she was no longer the one sleeping on the floor. Instead, she was the architect of her new life, down to every detail. She opened a separate bank account for her salary, ensuring her parents had no knowledge of her growing stability. This wasn't just about leaving. It was about appearing differently, unignorable, undeniable. Each evening after work, as golden hour bathed the quiet suburban streets, Ava stepped silently into house number 115. From the outside, it still looked unassuming, a dusty roof, faded siding, and a backyard full of weeds. But inside, a transformation was unfolding, deliberate, elegant, and undeniably hers. The bedroom was finished first. She chose neutral tones, soft lighting, and large windows that welcomed the morning sun, not for aesthetics, but for peace. The bathroom was outfitted with a rainfall shower and heated tile floors, a small luxury she had dreamed of during her college days. The kitchen became her signature piece: quartz countertops, oak cabinetry, pendant lights with industrial flair. It wasn't just a place to cook. It was where new chapters would begin. Ava hired no interior designer. She selected every item herself, from drawer pulls to floor tiles. To some, it may have seemed like a simple starter home, but to Ava, it was a declaration of autonomy. After office hours, she would arrive, still dressed in business attire, laptop and blueprints in hand. Her contractors grew used to her attention to detail, no longer surprised when she requested they replace every cabinet handle because they didn't feel grounded enough. Meanwhile, back at her parents' house, life carried on as if she were invisible. She still rolled up her sleeping bag each morning, still cleaned, still listened to conversations about Riley's latest accomplishments. But she no longer felt resentment. The anger had turned to resolve. The resolve had become action. And the action was taking shape. One evening, Linda casually mentioned how the lavender walls in Riley's room were great for focus. Ava smiled politely. There was no need to comment. She had chosen her own wall colors in a space no one could take from her. By the 5th week, the house was nearly ready. The kitchen functioned. The bedrooms smelled of fresh paint. Warm light spilled across newly finished walls like a quiet welcome. Standing in the doorway, Ava touched the light switch she'd personally selected, and for the first time in years, she thought, "I'm home." On her final night sleeping on the living room floor, Ava didn't sleep. She lay still in her worn-out sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling she had once felt at home beneath. Familiar sounds, the ticking clock, the hum of the heater, Riley's footsteps above, no longer stung. They felt like the final notes of a song she was about to turn off forever. At 5 a.m., Ava quietly sat up. The house was still dark. Everyone was asleep. She packed her bedding one last time, rolled it tightly, and tucked it neatly into the hallway closet, a silent goodbye. No bitterness, no ceremony. She climbed the stairs once more, retrieving a few personal items she'd hidden away: a couple of books, an old alarm clock, a photo with her grandmother. Each item packed without a sound. She intended to leave nothing behind but absence. On the kitchen counter, Ava left a single piece of paper written in clear block letters. "Found my own place. Won't be needing the floor anymore. Ava." No exclamation, no thank you, no complaint. Just a plain truth. She lifted 2 suitcases and a backpack and stepped outside. The sky was still dark. Morning mist clung to the porch railings. Ava stood in front of the house that had been hers for nearly 30 years. One last time, not as a daughter inside it, but as a woman walking away from it. Then she turned and walked toward a different direction, not far, just next door, but it was a world apart. She unlocked the door to number 115 with a new key. The click of the lock felt like a whisper. "You belong here now." She set her bags down on the still shiny hardwood floors, turned on the lights, and took a deep breath. It was quiet, but it was peace. That day, Ava went to work like any other. She said nothing about her move. She didn't respond to the texts from her mother, from her father, even from Riley. They asked where she was, why her things were gone, what had happened. Ava read every message, but she didn't reply, because she knew the answer was next door. That afternoon, when Ava returned to her new home, she immediately sensed eyes watching from behind the curtains of her parents' house. Their cars were still in the driveway. They had been home all day, and now they knew. Ava didn't look their way. She popped the trunk, retrieved her remaining bags, and calmly walked up the steps of house number 115. No rush, no secrecy. Every movement deliberate, as if this had been routine all along. Minutes later, a knock came at the door. Through the peephole, she saw both Linda and Gary standing side by side, confusion and disbelief etched into their faces. She opened the door, standing firmly in the threshold. She didn't step back. She didn't invite them in. "Ava," her mother began, eyes darting past her into the furnished living room. "What is all this? Did you actually buy this house?" Ava nodded. "Yes, right next door." "How did you even manage that?" Gary asked, like the idea was beyond reason. "I've been working at Cascade Design for 6 weeks," she said, voice calm. "The firm I interviewed with, the one no one ever asked about. Silence followed. Linda blinked. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because no one asked," Ava replied. "Just like no one warned me before moving my things into the hallway." Gary's face flushed. Linda stepped forward as if to walk inside, but Ava gently raised a hand. "This is my home. I decide who enters. That's a privilege, not a given." The shock on their faces was unmistakable. They had never imagined Ava would claim such a boundary, let alone build a life entirely her own right next door. "But we're family," Linda said, as if the word could erase everything. Ava met her eyes. Her voice was soft but firm. "Family doesn't make someone sleep on the floor. Family doesn't ignore pain. Family doesn't measure worth by job titles or salary." At that moment, a mechanical rumble echoed from the backyard. Gary craned his neck to look. "What's happening back there?" "Renovations," Ava said, simply, lips curling into a subtle smile. "They're starting on the pool today." And with that, she closed the door, not angrily, not vindictively, just definitively. The hum of drills, the groan of excavators, and the chatter of construction workers echoed through the neighborhood all week. Every morning, as Linda entered the kitchen to brew her coffee, she saw the bright yellow backhoe digging into the earth behind Ava's house, directly in view of her kitchen window. Ava's presence, once dismissed as temporary, now made itself heard and seen daily in concrete and steel. Ava was not one to show off, but everything she did was intentional. The 16-32-foot pool wasn't just for leisure, it was a statement. Its deep blue waters would sit squarely in her backyard, perfectly framed in her parents' line of sight. It didn't say, "I got even." It said, "This is what someone can do when she's no longer being stepped over." Throughout construction, Ava remained polite. When Linda brought over a tray of cookies to welcome the new neighbor, Ava accepted them with a soft thank you, but didn't open the door beyond that. When Gary offered to help pick out patio tile, Ava replied evenly, "I've got a professional crew for that, but thank you." No cruel words, no slammed doors, just a clear refusal to let them reclaim center stage in her life. On the day the waterfall feature, the pool's signature piece, was being installed, Linda showed up at Ava's back door. Her expression was uncertain. "Is this some kind of message?" she asked, gesturing toward the nearly complete pool. Ava didn't flinch. "I'm creating a space that reflects my values, just like you created one that told me the floor was what I deserved." Linda's eyebrows pulled together. "You're being dramatic." Ava smiled gently. Her voice remained calm. "Temporary is when you choose to leave, not when you're shoved aside. I'm doing exactly what you encouraged, becoming independent, building something of my own, and leaving where I wasn't welcome." For the first time, Linda had no response. She stood there staring into the yard, a space that once marked an invisible line between parent and child, now transformed into a tangible boundary of choice. Of all the responses Ava received from her family after moving out, Riley's was the only one that didn't come with excuses. One late afternoon, while Ava was trimming the flower beds in her front yard, she heard soft footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Riley standing at the edge of the walkway, no makeup hair pulled back, holding 2 to-go coffee cups. "I wasn't sure if you liked mocha or vanilla," Riley said hesitantly, "so I brought both." Ava paused, then gave a small nod. She gestured toward the porch steps. "Have a seat." They sat side by side in silence for a while, the warm evening sun casting long shadows on the pavement, the scent of freshly cut grass in the air. Finally, Riley spoke. "I was awful to you, not just because I took your room, but because I let it happen. I piled on. I know I hurt you. I'm really sorry." Ava turned to look at her. There was no defensiveness in Riley's face, just regret and truth. "You're young," Ava said quietly, "but you're old enough to know right from wrong. Still, you're the only one in the family who's acknowledged that." Riley looked down. "I've been thinking about what you went through. If someday I lost my job or hit a rough patch, I wouldn't want to be treated like that. And I keep wondering, if I had been in your shoes, would they have made me sleep on the floor, or would they have found another way? Ava didn't answer. She didn't need to. Riley had already arrived at a truth the adults in the house still avoided. I want us to have a real relationship again, Riley continued. Not the kind where you sleep on the floor and I throw parties. I mean, actually listen to each other, share things, respect each other. Ava exhaled slowly. I've changed a lot, Riley. Not just in ways people can see, inside. I can't go back to being who I was, but I can give you a chance to start fresh. Riley nodded, eyes misty. So, we start with coffee. Ava smiled. Yeah, one step at a time. Summer arrived with golden afternoons and the gentle hum of water from the new pool. House number 115 had become a true home, not just because Ava owned it, but because every detail within it reflected who she was, resilient, intentional, and entirely self-made. Ava began hosting quiet weekend gatherings. Not loud parties, just soft jazz home-cooked meals and laughter drifting through warm evening air. No one mentioned that she used to sleep on the floor. No one questioned why she lived next door to her parents, but never visited. They only saw Ava as a woman of taste, presence, and purpose, someone who built her world brick by brick. She wasn't trying to teach her parents a lesson. No one was humiliated. There were no soap opera confrontations. Every explanation had already been lived. And now Ava didn't need to justify herself. She no longer needed permission to exist. One afternoon, as Ava watered her plants on the porch, Linda passed by slowly. Their eyes met for a moment. Then Linda gave a small nod. No apology, no story. But Ava understood for the first time her mother saw her not as a burden, but as an equal. And that was enough. Riley still visited on Saturdays. They weren't as close as they once were, but there was a new peace between them. No competition, no avoidance, no performance. Just two people learning how to connect for real this time. On a quiet Sunday morning, Ava opened her laptop and looked at the unfinished design file for her backyard. At the top, in neat letters, it read, Phase 2, Garden plus Pergola. She smiled. A new life was still unfolding slowly, steadily. And this time she didn't need anyone's permission.